Batya, I'm delighted to learn what's on your radar.
Well, as you all know, last week, President Biden announced he would be taking the unprecedented step of forgiving $10,000 in student loans to borrowers making less than $125,000 a year. Second-year Harvard Law graduate Supreme Court clerks, social media editors at major publications, dentists early in their careers, accountants taking their first jobs, all of these people will qualify for this taxpayer-funded bailout of the upper class. Of course, some people who truly need and deserve help will qualify too. About 10% of Americans who attended some college dropped out before getting a degree, and some of them are saddled with student loans while working minimum wage jobs. Certainly, some of the forgiveness will apply to them. But even more of it will go to the elites, young, college-educated Americans at the beginning of what will be very lucrative and stable careers by the time they're in their 30s and 40s, and to others currently making double the median income of the average household in this nation. I'm not going to relitigate the student loan debate. Robbie, you did an amazing job of holding down the fort last week. But as someone who spends most of my reporting hours talking to working class Americans across the nation, you can guess where I stand on this legislation, a piece of class warfare that Inez Stepman has called a reverse Robin Hood, taking from the poor and giving to the rich, or what Zed Jelani has called a Brahmin bailout, or what railroad worker Charles Stallworth called trickle-down economics leftist edition in Newsweek. The point I want to make today is that the student loan forgiveness program is not an aberration. It's the apotheosis of a trend on the progressive left in which progressives wage class war on the working class, but dress it up as a moral pose. It's a move you see over and over on the new progressive left. They take their economic privilege, mistake it for virtue, and then make the working class pay for it. Student loan forgiveness is, of course, the perfect example of this. It's always portrayed by the left as some kind of social justice initiative, when the truth is the opposite. The highest income 40% of borrowers hold 60% of the student debt in this country. And yes, some poor folks and working class folks have student loans, but the vast majority of student debt is held by people who will, on average, make $1 million more in their lives than people who don't have a degree. A college degree is not only a predictor of upward mobility, but better health outcomes, a longer life, and all the benefits of today's economy, which elites of both parties have made sure works extremely well for knowledge industry jobs and extremely poorly for the people who do the kinds of jobs we actually rely on to exist. How do progressives, the people who are supposed to care about the lower classes, about fairness, about equity, end up pushing for a bailout for the people already most likely to succeed in this country, a bailout that will be paid at taxpayers' expense, meaning by the working class? At least Biden capped the forgiveness at those making $125,000 a year or less. But recall that the progressive position was total cancellation for every Harvard Law educated lawyer and every NYU educated dentist, and perhaps not coincidentally, every congressperson making $175,000 a year. How is this the progressive position? Well, consider who progressives are. According to the Pew Research Center, progressives are the whitest and tied for most highly educated of all of the groups that make up the Democratic coalition. There's your answer. This is class warfare on their own behalf. It's not just progressives, though. The entire Democratic Party has undergone a status revolution of late. 65% of Americans making over $500,000 a year are now Democrats, while 74% of voters making less than $100,000 a year vote Republican. 84 of the 100 highest educated counties in the country vote Democrat. The wealthiest 4% of Americans are increasingly Democrats, and 98% of donations from Silicon Valley went to President Biden. Joe Biden also got more political donations from Wall Street than Donald Trump did. When you realize who progressives are, it's clear that what they're doing with student loan forgiveness is just advocating for their own economic interests. And there's actually nothing wrong with that. The problem is that is not what they say. They don't admit that they are pushing for something that will benefit them. They cast this as some kind of moral battle for the indigent, when what it is lining the pockets of the elites. Here's the thing, student loan forgiveness is not the only example like this. When you examine the entire progressive platform, Every plank of it has this category error in it of misunderstanding economic privilege as moral virtue and then demanding that the working class pay for it. I've discussed here at length how this works with regards to immigration. How the class that benefits from cheap goods and cheap labor decided to call you racist if you work in an industry that's undercut by importing an entirely new working class from another part of the world. It's also the case with their maximalist green agenda. One class is zipping around in electric cars, the perfect virtue signal because it signals not only your virtue, but how rich you are, while the other class has good union jobs in the energy sector axed in favor of importing slave-manufactured wind turbines from China. They are all for releasing mentally ill drug addicts into your communities where they prey on vulnerable people of color, while they live in nice neighborhoods with astronomical rents polishing their halos. COVID lockdowns, of course, worked this way too. The homeowner class's home values skyrocketed. Private school educated children soared astronomically ahead of their public school counterparts, who were relegated to Zoom learning by the laptop class's regime, which punished the working class who had to brave the plague. They cast anybody who opposed lockdown as a moral pervert while watching their own bank accounts swell. And then, when it came time to end the lockdowns, they demanded that you take the vaccine to protect them while they were served by you, so they could feel comfortable being waited on you in restaurants and hospitals. Student loan forgiveness isn't an aberration of who the Democrats are under the sway of the progressive movement, but the apotheosis of a party, upwardly transferring wealth from the working class to themselves. It's trickle-up economics. And if you oppose any aspect of it, you're selfish, says Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez on Instagram about the student loan forgiveness policy over the weekend. Quote, in light of the ecological, economic, and social challenges we face, our society's ability to triumph and prevail actually depends on our capacity for selflessness over selfishness, she wrote in her thoughts on student loan forgiveness. Did you get that? Stop being so selfish, waitresses and linemen and nurses' aides and cops. Pay off our student loans. Pay us a $12,000 rebate for our Teslas. Keep funding DEI consultants who have ballooned the cost of a college education, so we'll be in this exact same place in 3 years. How can you be so selfish as to oppose any of this, wonders a woman making $174,000 a year. They don't just call you selfish. Progressives, including the president, hit back against criticism of the student loan forgiveness scam by bringing up the payroll protection loans that many took out when the government locked down the economy and made it impossible for people to work. How are these at all comparable? Where exactly is the contradiction between not wanting people to get laid off and not wanting truck drivers to pay off the loans of first-year corporate lawyers? Or they bring up Republicans' handouts to the rich. What about Trump's tax cuts? Indeed, that is exactly who they most resemble. Someone should tell them that this isn't a defense, but an admission of guilt. Student loan forgiveness is a tax cut for the rich. If the Republicans have for too long been the party of the rich, the Democrats have become the party of the overeducated elites, pushing open borders, corporate lawyer loan forgiveness, climate and COVID extremism as a form of class warfare against the very people they used to view as their base. Not anymore. They used to ask why the working class is voting against their economic interests when they vote for Republicans. That line of argument is no longer available to them, even as a joke. It's like they're begging you to understand this. They don't want your votes. And some are even coming out and saying that these days, like Florida Democrat gubernatorial hopeful Charlie Crist, who had a basket of deplorables moment last week when asked about how he was going to attract the supporters of his rival, Governor Ron DeSantis.
What do you say to the Floridians who buy into, who support the governor and his policies?
Those who support the governor should stay with him and vote for him, and I don't want your vote. If you have that hate in your heart, keep it there. I want the vote of the people of Florida who care about our state. Good Democrats, good independents, good Republicans. Unify with this ticket. Unify with Val Demings and Charlie Crist. Unify with us. Those who are haters, you're going to go off in your own world. And you better get right.
Did you hear that? Chris said the quiet part out loud. I don't want your vote. But even more are saying it with their actions. So, Robbie, we're sort of aligned on this issue. I think the class warfare aspect of it, the sometimes disingenuous nature of the pushback from the progressive left, and I really enjoyed your radar, which was very much on a similar topic, but I think took the angle of the larger problem that is not being fixed, but that's actually being supported by this. And I saw somebody making an argument that I thought was really interesting. So after the Inflation Reduction Act was passed, it had in that rebate. I think in the end the rebate was $7,000 if you buy an electric car, and literally the next day electric cars, the companies that sell them boosted the price by exactly $7,000, and that's exactly what we're going to see now with exactly with the universities.
Well, and then people will come to me and say, why? You're against giving a bailout to indebted college students and graduates, but, what about all those other bailouts? I guess you don't know me very well. I was certainly against whatever bailout you're about to suggest to me. And then they were using, people were using the PPP loan, the loans, I'm mixing my terminology here, for forgiveness for those. But, fair enough. I was actually fine if you wanted to, rail against whatever, although some of those were wrong. Ben Shapiro was accused of getting one of those forgiven, and it was the wrong Ben Shapiro. National Review was accused of it. It wasn't that. There's been a lot of, misfires on accusing who got this loan forgiven. But, those loans were given because the government shut down the economy, to pay workers through that period. I'm not sure I would have kept certain things shut down for as long as certainly not as long as public health officials and Team Blue wanted them shut down. So I think that's a different scenario. But fair enough. In general, I'm very against group and industry-specific bailouts. We've seen with the airline industry, they bailed that industry out, and what happened? They fired too many pilots anyway, and now air travel is ridiculously screwed up. So it didn't help. So many times they say, okay, well, we're going to give you this money, but here's how we, the government, want it, done so that it doesn't hurt people too much. And these companies, they give it to their, sometimes they just give it to their millionaire CEOs and executives anyway, and they don't spend it on the things you want them to spend it on. So it's a very fraught project in general. So no hypocrisy for me. I was against the bank bailouts. I was against the auto bailouts. I was against et cetera, et cetera. So it's funny to see people try to, and then if we're doing that conflation, if people are saying that this is just like that and that was wrong, well then isn't this wrong? It doesn't make any sense. So
yeah, I also do think there is a huge difference between someone who employs other people and someone who employs themselves, right? There's just a big difference between those two things. If you are creating jobs, that is something the government should be invested in, clearly. I think maybe you don't agree with me. Yeah. But these things are very
okay. We finally have a disagreement so far today. Yeah, I don't know about that. Maybe let's just ease up on whatever the government's doing. But we'll get into it some more right after this. Stay tuned. We'll be back with more Rising.